Good morning. I am Matt Fruman, Ward 3 Council Member and Chairperson of the Committee on Human Services. Today is Thursday, October 30th, 2025. We are meeting in room 412 of the John A. Wilson Building and on the Zoom virtual platform. The time is now 9:39 a.m. Today, we are conducting a public hearing on B26-0366, the Flexible Rent Subsidy Program Amendment Act of 2025, and B26-0367, the Public Benefits Security Amendment Act of 2025. I, along with council members Nadeau, Parker, Bonds, Lewis, George, Allen, Pinto, Robert White, and Trayon White, introduced B26-0366, the Flexible Rent Subsidy Program Amendment Act of 2025, on September 24th, 2025. This bill would make the Flexible Rent Subsidy Pilot Program, also known as DC Flex or just Flex, permanent. Flex provides a fixed annual subsidy to cover part of participants' households' monthly rent. It functions differently than housing vouchers, which are the most common type of housing subsidy. While voucher payments are made monthly and cover 100% of the household's rent, Flex subsidies are paid out annually and are designed to cover only a part of a household's rent. Additionally, while voucher payments go directly to landlords to cover a set amount of the monthly rent, Flex subsidies are paid into dedicated accounts that allow families to determine how much of their annual subsidies they want to use each month. The flexible approach gives families autonomy, encourages households to continue to work and grow income, and may allow the district to prevent homelessness for more residents at a lower cost than housing vouchers. The council established Flex as a pilot program in the fiscal year 2017 Budget Support Act of 2016. The council originally intended the program to operate for 4 years, but later extended the program's authorization to the end of fiscal year 2026. If the program is not extended again or made permanent, participant households will no longer receive subsidies after September 30th, 2026. The council needs to decide whether to keep Flex going or to support the residents currently receiving subsidies in other ways. The need to act is especially urgent because Flex has grown so quickly. A program that began as a small pilot for families alone now serves 220 families and 21 individuals. All households need to know whether they will still have Flex next fall. We've seen evidence that Flex works to keep families stably housed. An early study found that the program decreased participants' use of homeless services by 28.6%, and that 88% of participants remained stably housed after a year in the program, and that one out of three participants did not spend down their annual subsidies, rolling savings into future program years. Just last spring, the Department of Human Services, or DHS, which administers Flex, reported that no Flex participants presented to shelter in FY24. Today, I look forward to hearing from the community and DHS, not just on the question of whether DC Flex should continue, but how the program can be improved if it does continue. If the committee decides to make DC Flex permanent, it will have to answer important questions about the program's rules. I will be asking our witnesses today about how long participants should be able to receive subsidies, whether and when they should be able to request extensions, who should be eligible to enter and stay in the program, and how large the annual subsidy needs to be to end and prevent homelessness. Turning now to the benefits theft legislation. We are also discussing today B26-0367, the Public Benefits Security Amendment Act, which I, along with Council members Nadeau, Allen, Pinto, Bonds, Louis George, Parker, Henderson, and Robert White introduced on September 24th, 2025. This bill would reduce public benefits theft by requiring DHS to transition away from less secure, swipeable electronic benefit transfer or EBT cards to a more secure microchipped EBT cards. The legislation also requires DHS to restore the public assistance of residents whose benefits are stolen. DHS currently loads both cash assistance benefits like temporary assistance for needy families or TANF and nutrition assistance benefits from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program or SNAP on the same EBT cards. Unfortunately, district residents have reported the theft of more than 10 million from EBT cards in the past 3 years. When residents lose their benefits to theft, no district or federal law requires restoration of those benefits. The district, however, could reduce up to 90% of benefits theft by transitioning away from magnetic EBT cards to new microchipped EBT cards, which generate a unique code each time they are used. These one-time use codes prevent a form of theft called skimming, where thieves place devices on terminals at retailers to gather customers' card information. While the data from a swipeable magnetic card can be used by thieves to make future transactions, the one-time use data from a chip card cannot. Both bills before the committee today build on strengths, innovation, and hard work of DHS. Just as the agency has done excellent work standing up Flex and adapting that program to better meet residents' needs, it has done excellent work to prevent theft and make residents whole if their benefits are stolen. DHS has already investigated the advantages of transitioning to chip cards and has implemented measures like the use of individualized PINs to help prevent theft. Additionally, although I will have questions about where the funds are coming from, the agency has dug deep to find the funding necessary to reimburse residents for stolen benefits. This legislation would make the agency's already strong work easier, supporting the transition to chip cards and providing dedicated funds to restore stolen benefits. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about what DHS has done and is considering doing to prevent theft and how the council can best support that work. Before I turn to that, and the public witnesses for their testimony, I do want to note that we're talking about SNAP in one way or another today, and we're facing a very serious challenge around SNAP in this particular moment, where the federal government, because of the shutdown, is not prepared to distribute SNAP benefits, and we, the district, for November, and we, the district, must decide what to do. Do we step in and avert tens of thousands of people and tens of thousands of children from going hungry for any length of time, or do we wait? And this is a tricky moment, but I do expect to be asking the director about where we are on this particular question. I was at a ribbon cutting yesterday, and the mayor said that she was waiting until a decision was made in the TRO case that our Attorney General has come forward with. I don't know where we'll be in the day, whether we will have had such a decision at the time that the director comes on to testify, but this is obviously a question of the moment. And it's one where our residents need clarity. It is also a challenging moment for the administration because if we spend the money to backfill for the federal government, and then the federal government comes forward and picks up the responsibility, we will not be reimbursed. So it is a tricky moment, but one in which our residents will be looking for clarity. I do want to say that in this period, I have worked very closely with the director, with the city administrator to try to track this. And the decisions keep being kicked down the road. In a way, I understand it, but also we need to get to clarity. So again, we'll come back to that in the back and forth with Director Pierre. I think a different issue that could come up for Director Pierre, and just in the spirit of transparency and so that everybody is prepared, we are hearing from a lot of people about ERAP and folks hoping to get clarity about how ERAP will be rolled out. And so while not technically raised by this hearing, Director Pierre, you're here, so I will be asking you about it as I did at the previous hearing. We don't have any other council members here, so before we hear from our public witnesses, I would like to offer a note on logistics. I ask that all witnesses limit their testimony to their allotted time. Advisory neighborhood commissioners and representatives of organizations will have 5 minutes. Other public witnesses will have 3 minutes to testify. We will start by hearing from public witnesses who are participating in person. After hearing from our in-person witnesses, we will turn to our virtual witnesses. I will call the public witnesses who are here in person to testify on a single panel. If you are here to testify when your name is called, please take a seat at the table in front of me. And before you speak, please make sure you turn on the microphone in front of your seat. Our first public witness is McKenna Osborne, Senior Policy Attorney at the Children's Law Center. I also have Salim Adolfo, Commissioner ANC 8C, Chairperson ANC 8C. I don't see Mr. Adolfo. Is there anyone else here who has come to testify in person? Hearing none, I will turn to Ms. Osborne. Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for all of your contributions on these issues.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Fruman. My name is McKenna Osborne. I'm a senior policy attorney at Children's Law Center and a resident of the district. I'm testifying today on behalf of Children's Law Center. Our more than 100 staff work with children, families, and partners across the district toward a future where every child can grow up with a strong foundation of family, health, and education. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today on the Flexible Rent Subsidy Program Amendment Act of 2025. Each year, Children's Law Center works with hundreds of DC families who are trying to provide their children with the security of safe, healthy, and stable housing. We see firsthand how challenging that is when even a family with 2 steady, full-time minimum wage jobs can't afford market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment. And we know that different families need different levels and types of assistance to reach long-term housing stability. That's why Children's Law Center supports the goal of this act to make DC Flex a permanent program within DHS's spectrum of housing assistance programs. Because 5 years of a flexible, shallow rental subsidy could be a cost-effective way for the district to help a portion of housing insecure families access and maintain stable housing. It's also important, as you pointed out, to ensure that the hundreds of families entering DC Flex in fiscal year 2026 will have continuity of their rental assistance beyond next September. However, we want to ensure that the permanent version of DC Flex established by the council can succeed in its purpose to help families enrolled in the program maintain housing for 5 years and be in a position to independently support market rent at the end of the program, and to do so in a manner that's cost effective for the district and DHS. But we're concerned that the act as currently written will not achieve that. If possible, Children's Law Center urges the committee to wait to mark up this legislation until the committee and stakeholders have reviewed the full evaluation of the DC Flex pilot program that the lab at DC has stated will be published in early 2026. That review should inform how we set the annual rental assistance levels, eligibility requirements, and structure of the permanent DC Flex program so that they're calibrated based on evidence of what worked and didn't work for families during the pilot. As the written testimony I will submit shortly for the record will detail, Children's Law Center is particularly concerned that the amount of assistance is too low and too static to make DC Flex a reliable path to long-term housing stabilities for most families who are eligible for the program under the law. As DHS reported to this committee during the FY26 budget process, moving forward, they intend to use DC Flex as an exit pathway from rapid rehousing and short-term family housing. Based on the most recent data available, the average monthly incomes for families in short-term family housing and rapid rehousing is around $781 a month and $1,316 a month, respectively. And we know from years of evidence from rapid rehousing that it's unrealistic for most DC families in those circumstances to meaningfully grow their income in just 1 year. So we can reasonably assume that the families currently enrolling in DC Flex will have monthly incomes of around that amount. And given that fair market rent for a 2-bedroom is currently $2,314, even if those families put 100% of their monthly income toward rent for the first year in DC Flex, they would still be thousands of dollars below what they need to maintain stable housing in that year. Therefore, in the evidence we do have from the first year of the pilot program, the only year that we have formal evaluation for, suggests that unless we can significantly increase the amount of assistance that families get in that first year and potentially beyond based on their individual needs, then we will likely see significant numbers of families in the program having to apply for ERAP, negotiating with their landlords and being at risk of homelessness and eviction in the future. And that is what we want to avoid, because I don't think anyone wants DC Flex to become another version of rapid rehousing for families. And Children's Law Center welcomes the opportunity to work with the committee once it receives that evaluation of the full pilot program to make changes to the existing legislation to calibrate it to meet those goals for families and the district. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. Commissioner Adolfo, nice to see you.
Good morning, council member. My name is Salim Adolfo, chairperson of Advisory Neighborhood Commission 8C, and ANC 8C strongly supports Bill 26-0366 to make the flexible rent subsidy program DC Flex permanent, and urges timely enactment to avoid any lapse in authorization. DC Flex matters because since 2017, it's provided a fixed annual shallow rent subsidy that covers a portion of households' monthly rent. Unlike deep subsidies that can cover the full rent, DC Flex offers predictable, modest assistance that helps families close the gap. prevent eviction, and stay stably housed while looking for work or not having enough income, and manage the shock of illness, caregiving, or rising costs that we see in the district. It is the district's only shadow subsidy, and its statutory authority expires on September 30th, 2026, unless the council acts. A gap in authorization would jeopardize many current families and undermine the district's broader homelessness prevention strategy. Many residents experience high rent burdens and housing instability. Many families are only a few $100s short each month. That shortfall translates into late fees, court filings, and preventable shelter entries. A permanent and predictable shallow subsidy is a practical tool that complements deep subsidies and emergency programs by catching families before crisis. Here are a few recommendations for a strong permanent DC Flex. Equity and targeting, prioritizing extremely rent-burdened households that are imminent at risk eviction, and with clear outreach goals in wards 7 and 8. Simplicity and predictability, keep DC Flex easy to access and easy to plan around. A fixed annual benefit, light touch documentation, and minimal recertification burden. Predictability allows families to budget confidently and to avoid churn. Coordination and not necessarily operating in silos. We don't know the future of an emergency rental assistance program, but if DC Flex can be in conjunction with that program, and once we can see the improvement of rapid rehousing, maybe in conjunction with that as well. And then have landlord engagement and different payment options. Where we saw issues with programs like DC Stay, possibly we can have the rent go directly to the landlord to avoid mishaps in the spending of the resources. And I would say finally, having a higher level of transparency and accountability. Push for ward level metrics to be published annually. How many families got help? How long did they stay housed, and the average help amount? And how many evictions were avoided? This level of transparency will help to build more community trust. And I apologize. The last one is language accessibility. We oftentimes see this information published only in English or not in ways that folks with disabilities can access it. The more that we can provide this in areas of accessibility, the greater chances of it being used. Thank you.
Okay, really, really appreciate it. The way I think about this program is it's one tool in the toolbox. And so then the question of who it should be used for becomes critically important. And I think both of you spoke to this issue. And Ms. Osborne, you came forward with a hypothetical about a very low income family, well below 30% AMI. And is it the right program for that category of resident, or do we need a different program? We don't. One of the things that became a challenge is ERAP was the one thing we had, and then it turned into something that was different than its original definition. And here, in different places, in Virginia, they do it one way. In California, they do it a different way. I want to try to be careful to think about what's the right population for this shallow subsidy tool. So I'm going to invite both of you to speak to that because there are populations for whom, by definition, it will fail. But there are populations for whom it can work. So how do we do that?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Council Member. And I think that's the right question to be asking. And some of the who this program will work for, it can either depend on what amount of annual assistance the council is willing to fund. We can set an amount based on the families that we intend and aim to serve through the program. And right now, the way that the eligibility requirements are written, even though I do appreciate that the proposed legislation includes an eligibility requirement around whether the family is likely to be able to increase their income over time. How that is operationalized without more clear instruction to DHS and I think more detail about how you would determine that eligibility. Right now, the pool of families that are eligible for DC Flex is coming from shelter and rapid rehousing. And they are in that, for the most part, extremely low income category that you mentioned earlier and that I cited in my hypotheticals. And so unless we can, if that is the population we're going to be serving, then we need to figure out how we can meet their needs. And that's why I would really love to see the full pilot evaluation to understand and more detail about the families currently in rapid rehousing and shelter beyond just the average incomes, to see how many families are there that actually do have incomes currently or could have incomes high enough to make a more shallow subsidy work for them. And then also making sure that we are funding those deeper subsidies for the families that do need it, for whom what DC Flex is will not work, so that we're not leaving them behind. And then finally, I think that there should be room potentially to adjust. Right now, the way the program is set up is to be the same amount for every family and every year they're in the program. And I think some more flexibility around the amount for family based on their individual circumstances and having it change year over year if they do grow their income, because they're likely to need more support their first year, but that doesn't mean that they can't grow their income over 5 years. But if we don't fund them enough rental assistance in the first year, it's not going to matter because they're going to potentially be evicted and terminated from the program and back into housing instability.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner Adolfo.
Yes, this is definitely a magic and complicated question, but I do think that when we see like you said earlier, this is just one tool in the many of the available options that we have to help maintain housing stability. I think that there's an opportunity to look at families that may not qualify for emergency rental assistance as an opportunity to shift the program there. If you don't qualify for this program, here we have an alternative program. I think that when I look at the residents who live near me in Ward 8, specifically in CHC, we have many residents that are on the margins that if they just had a little bit more help. And so I don't know all of what the income requirements and guidelines are, but if it's an opportunity for something to be income-based, then I think that's another opportunity as well. I tried to find as much information as I could on how much was provided through the Flex program, but I couldn't find that. So if I could find that information, it'll allow me to give you a more substantive answer. But I do think that when we see that families that are a few $100s away and looking at where their income is, I do think that's an opportunity to say these are the folks that we want to target.
I hear you on that. And I mean, one of the challenges in the hypothetical that you offered, the subsidy would pretty much have to be full rent. And so then where you get to is this is rapid rehousing by another name for 5 years. And that's a challenge. So we're all trying to figure out how to make this work for the people who it has the most promise for. And one of the ideas that are out there, and Ms. Osborne, you cited it from the legislation, is using the potential for income growth as one of the criteria. And you raised it. I'm curious how you think should that be a thing that we look at, and then how would you propose that we evaluate it? Although part of what your testimony was, more thought needs to go into this, so I'm not asking you for a definitive answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I think my first suggestion would be that I would want to see what the the evaluation of the full pilot showed from over time what families' incomes looked like while they had, well, did they definitely have stability in their housing over the time in the program? And did that stability allow them to grow their income, and how? And what was their economic situation at interim points in the program and at the end, to see what their long-term outcomes were? And we could learn from that there may be some criteria that those families have in common that we could try to more narrowly target that eligibility requirement. But I think we really would need to look at that and to make that decision. And I do, based on how programs operate currently, I am not confident that something as broad as potential to grow their income will result in families that are likely to succeed in the program being placed in it. And I also we don't want to unnecessarily screen out families, because stability is a really important part of being able to grow your income. And so we don't know, I think, unless maybe the pilot information will show this, that if you give some family, like for example, a young family, if they have young children who they are currently balancing childcare for, but at the end of 5 years, those children will be in school or in pre-K in a way that alleviates some of those childcare requirements on the family, that may make a big difference. And so maybe that's a good population, but we need to think about that more. And then again, also pair it with recognizing that there are still a lot of families who that won't work for, and we want to make sure we're also supporting them.
Mr. Duffy, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No, sir.
Okay, so when I hear you, and I hear you on flexibility in the amount, and I think what I'm hearing on the criteria of the potential to grow income, that is pretty subjective. And so then how do you do that? And then also, when we could try to inject a lot more subjectivity and discretion into how this is done, that presents its own set of challenges. And on the waiting for the results of the study, like ordinarily, I'm a let's see the data guy, but we are in a situation where this is going to expire. And we have hundreds of families today who are relying on it. So how do we wait and risk not dealing with this in the next budget?
My hope and my understanding, and maybe we can get more information from the director later today, but everything I've read from DHS and from the lab at DC is that they intend to publish early 2026 and that they plan to have all of their internal evaluations done by the end of 2025, so that hopefully the committee could get access to, if not the final report, the preliminary evaluations, and still be able to move on the bill before the FY27 budget.
Before the completion of the FY27 budget, but maybe not the administration's formulation of the budget is a different timeline, but okay, I hear you. You think there is time, Mr. Duffy.
One of the things I wanted for us to take into account is that we're clearly trying to establish a permanent program here. And I think oftentimes we operate as an either or. And given the current climate that we're in, where we see many district residents being furloughed, and at the time of this hearing, SNAP is a big unknown for us, we also have to take into consideration, how do we make something flexible for the time now, no pun intended. And I think that we have to take into account the right now. So if we are seeing residents that may, like I said, be experiencing furlough and won't have SNAP benefits, and I know that may be something that's going to be discussed later, where would this program fit for residents who were making 70, 80, $90,000 who could have been affording their rent, but now will fall short? Is this a program that will be open for residents in that income bracket? Is this a program strictly for residents who are well below the area median income? And I don't want to complicate the issue more, but I do think that given what this program is supposed, I think the spirit and the intent of the program is to provide a gap for residents. And I think that we're going to find residents, given this current climate, that traditionally wouldn't have been part of this program that will now maybe applying for this program, or when, you know, what we see with ERAP. And so I think that part of what we see moving into the future also needs to include residents who may have suffered job loss unexpectedly that we didn't see coming.
Oh, I hear you on that. I think that Ms. Osborne, in your testimony, you said like you can't decide how much money it is until you know what the different needs are. And then, but the flip side of that is you could decide how much we could spend in this space and then target it to the people who it could help. And so there is a chicken and an egg thing here. And part of it goes to, well, who's got the greatest likelihood of being able to grow their income. Another piece of it is how much does the subsidy achieve? Is the subsidy, if you have somebody who's extremely rent burdened, but you get them to a place where they're still rent burdened, or do we need to take everybody to where rent is no more than 29% of their total income? When you look at your client base, how many people do you see who could be helped by a rent subsidy on the order of $700 a month, a third of the rent, leaving still in your scenario of a family with a 2-bedroom with a 2,300? So they would still need to pay $1,600 if they were using $700 a month. How many people do you see like that?
I would, in terms of the specifics, I would have to look at like more details from our clients, but for our clients who don't have any other assistance, especially for larger families, that could be a challenge. If they are receiving some other assistance, if they're in an income limited property or unit already, and that is how my understanding of Philadelphia's shallow subsidy program works, is that the only people eligible for their shallow subsidy, which is capped at $500 a month, are those who are in income limited affordable housing units already. So that it is just trying to fill a gap of the assistance they already have to make their rent truly affordable, such that they are hopefully not spending more than 30% of their income on it. But so I think we just need to think about and I would be interested in DHS's thoughts on if they believe there are families in their homeless services system now who have the levels of income potentially, or have circumstances where it's reasonable to assume that they, with some stability, could eventually not need that level of assistance over 5 years, so that we could target it. And I think that those families probably are there, but we just need to target it appropriately so that we're not repeating rapid rehousing. And I will say that the evidence we do have from the first year of the pilot program does, if we do look at that, it does suggest that the assistance amount was too low, in that a third of participants had spent down all of their monthly or their annual rental assistance within 8 months, and many reported falling behind on rent or being worried about eviction, to the degree that the program administrators chose to change the program rules to allow participants to apply for ERAP. And so I think, and since then, monthly rent in DC has increased by 39%. And the increase in the level of assistance from initially the first year in the program to what's proposed in the legislation doesn't even cover that gap. It's a 33% increase. So at the very least, we can be thinking, what could we do to make sure that we're at least covering that 39% gap? And ideally, that most families in the program do not need to apply for ERAP to make the program work. And what level would that be?
Mr. Duffy, did you want?
No, sir.
One data point that I was pleased was in FY24, no participant in the program presented at shelter. So I think I take that as a good sign, but I hear you on the numbers. I think we all need to struggle with what's it for and who's it for. And there is the good problem of when a person's income does grow or a family's income does grow. And what would you do? How do you think we should be dealing with that situation where maybe somebody qualified at the time, they were below 40% AMI, but 3 years in, they're above that? How would you deal with that?
And I do appreciate that the legislation proposes increasing the eligibility for recertification to up to 60% AMI to help keep families in the program. I think we could, to really make sure that we're trying to target our resources the most effectively, we could look to change those, like how we calculate the annual amount of assistance for a family, so that it is, for example, tied to making up the difference between their income and their rent, so that if they grow their income, they may receive less assistance because they are able to cover a larger portion of their rent, but they're still receiving assistance in a degree that makes it that we're not having any sort of like benefits cliff or de-incentivizing issue, because they're still receiving it extra assistance, and it's just giving them more flexibility with the rest of their income.
I hear you on that. I do think I would not want to see a dollar for dollar reduction in benefits for increase in income. And so, because I do think incentivizing work and incentivizing income growth is a really important thing. So sounds like we're talking about something similar. I think you might have touched on a different question that I had, which is, if we have this and we have ERAP, should a person who is benefiting from this still be able to participate in ERAP? And I think I'm hearing you say yes.
Yeah, I think that you don't want a family who's in this program to potentially be evicted and terminated from the program just because they did have an emergency where ERAP maybe could have filled that gap. However, we really need to look at the structure of the program, if, as it was in the first year, in order to make the program work for a sizable number of participants, they needed to be allowed to apply for and potentially receive ERAP. That to me is a red flag that the assistance amount is too low for a portion of the families. Really, it's not the right resource for them.
Okay, and you threw out a couple of numbers, and I love numbers. So I think you said rent has gone up by 39% since 2017. Is that the idea?
I would have to double check my data. I think that's since 2019.
Okay.
Since the first year of the evaluation of the pilot.
I see. And then the amount you said the amount that's provided has gone up by 33%.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, from the 7,200, which it was initially, to the 9,600 in the proposed legislation.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony. Always great to hear from you both. There will be more back and forth on this, but for now, I want to thank you for your testimony, and we'll move on to the next panel. Okay, before turning to our virtual witnesses, I would like to provide some guidelines about using the Zoom platform. All witnesses participating in this webinar are currently listed as attendees in Zoom. This means that your microphones are muted and your cameras are turned off. I will call all virtual witnesses to testify on a single panel. I will call your name and a member of my staff will make you a panelist. If you wish to appear on video, you must click the button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen that looks like a video camera. Please remain muted until it is your turn to testify. When it is your turn to testify, please unmute yourself. For any technical difficulties, you can send a message to the host who is labeled as Committee on Human Services, and they will follow up with you. So now I will call our virtual witnesses. Nicole Dooley, Supervising Attorney, Legal Aid, DC. Katina Cheadle, Public Witness. Joshua Drumming, Policy and Advocacy Attorney, Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. And Robbie Woodland, Commissioner, ANC 8C06. Okay, so I see that we have Ms. Dooley and Mr. Drumming. Ms. Dooley, you are first up.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to testify. Ms. Cheadle, unfortunately, will be unable to join today, just as an update. I am here today on behalf of Legal Aid to express our support for the Public Benefits Security Amendment Act of 2025. Thousands of DC residents rely on public assistance, both SNAP and cash assistance, to meet their needs. These vital programs allow our neighbors to access nutritious food, cover housing costs, and support their families. This bill introduces straightforward, common sense steps to prevent public assistance theft and ensure the district's most vulnerable residents receive all due benefits. Each year, millions of dollars of benefits are stolen from DC residents' cards through card skimming, cloning, and similar methods with devastating consequences. For many, their SNAP and cash assistance, which includes both temporary assistance for needy families, or TANF, and interim disability assistance, or IDA, is their only reliable source of income, and any loss in benefits creates extreme challenges. For some, stolen benefits will look like falling behind on bills, potentially leading to evictions or utility terminations. For others, it will look like caretakers skipping meals to ensure that their children can eat. Stolen benefits are detrimental to economic security and contrary to the public assistance program's intent. This bill would bring DC's program in line with modern methods of theft prevention. Chip cards are now standard across commercial credit and debit cards, leaving outdated EBT cards especially vulnerable to thieves and fraudsters. Shifting to EMV technology brings DC into the 21st century with an efficient and effective solution. It would also bring DC in line with recommendations from the USDA, which confirmed in a letter to the states strongly urging the adoption of EMV technology that it has proven an effective method to safeguard card usage from theft and fraud. The adoption of EMV technology should greatly reduce instances of theft, but it will not eliminate them entirely. Therefore, this bill necessarily further recognizes the importance of restoring stolen benefits for DC residents and ensuring they have ample time to discover and report theft. DHS's current policy allows beneficiaries to seek replacement of stolen benefits within 30 days of the date the theft is discovered. And DHS recently proposed a more restrictive policy that would require beneficiaries to request reimbursement 60 days from the date of the first alleged fraudulent transaction, irrespective of when the beneficiary discovers the theft. Today's bill would allow beneficiaries to recover stolen benefits within 2 years of the theft. This proposed change recognizes the challenges beneficiaries face in discovering and reporting theft. For example, beneficiaries who are experiencing homelessness or unstable housing often do not have a safe and secure place to store their EBT card or may lose their card more frequently. Many beneficiaries do not have reliable phone service or internet access to check their EBT balance, requiring them to rely on the balances printed on store receipts, which is a much more burdensome expectation. For families with multiple people who shop using the household's benefits, each person may erroneously attribute fraudulent payments to another household member. And finally, some beneficiaries have disabilities or language access needs that make monitoring their EBT cards even more challenging. Each of these barriers makes it more difficult for beneficiaries to discover and report stolen benefits within a restricted time frame. This bill will better allow beneficiaries to recover their benefits despite their limiting circumstances. We thank you and all the sponsors of this bill for taking this important step in securing public assistance benefits for DC residents, and we look forward to working with the council to ensure funding is secured in the upcoming budget to implement these changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Drummond?
Good morning. My name is Joshua Drumming, attorney with the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. While we appreciate the opportunity to clarify the purpose and administration of DC Flex through the Flexible Rent Subsidy Program Amendment Act of 2025, permanent legislation to address a pilot program in which DHS is yet to provide full pilot program data and outcomes is premature. There has not been a comprehensive reporting of what the existing program has succeeded and or failed at, and what the outcomes have been for the participants that entered this program years ago. DC Council should not be moving to create permanent programs from any pilot without relevant data showing that the pilot has been successful at achieving its goals and the investment is fiscally sound. Funds for homeless services are never plentiful. Money could and should be used more appropriately to fund existing housing programs. If the data reflects that conclusion, a comprehensive analysis of existing data for DC Flex must be completed, provided before determining permanent next steps. One of our largest criticisms of DC Flex has been that the subsidy amount, current and proposed, is too small to be applied appropriately to the current demographic in which DC Flex is widely offered. For the last couple of years, DC Flex has been touted by DHS as a viable option for families in shelter or being terminated from rapid housing. The legal clinic has continued to express frustration with this agency talking point. The reality is that the majority of families or individuals in shelter or rapid housing do not have enough income to maintain housing in DC. In fact, the overwhelming majority of rapid housing participants report TANF as a sole and primary income. Despite these realities, DHS continues to act as though DC Flex is comparable to the subsidies of permanent vouchers or rapid housing. Current DHS participants maintaining their housing through subsidy programs cannot and will not be able to maintain their housing in any substantial way through DC Flex. On average, one-bedroom apartments in DC cost $2,300 a year. That number increases to $2,950 to $3,360 if one wants a two-bedroom. A yearly subsidy amount of $8,400 or $11,300 will allow families a few months of rent in DC's rental market. Realistically, DC Flex will only operate as another form of ERAP for most, allowing recipients to pay just a few more months of rent before they ultimately face eviction. There's no flexible feature of the program for families or individuals that have to rely primarily on the subsidy each month to supplement their housing costs. The eligibility criteria established in this bill remains unclear. Participants must be found by DHS to have sufficient income or potential to grow income such that enrollment in the program would end or prevent an episode of homelessness. It's unclear what constitutes a potential to grow. This ambiguity, if left as is, could be weaponized against program participants or at the very least applied differently to different people. Furthermore, it is unclear who the target demographic is for DC Flex. As aforementioned, the majority of current DHS shelter and rapid housing participants do not have enough income to maintain their housing without a substantial subsidy. If the majority of those who utilize DHS services are not the target of the program, DHS should be clear on who the program actually aims to serve. The committee should have data that illustrates exactly what percentage of current DHS clients participants would qualify as having sufficient income to be eligible for DC Flex under the proposed rules. The majority of those utilizing DHS services would not have sufficient income to be eligible for the program. The goal and purpose of the program within DHS is unclear. DC Flex should not simply be another fund that serves the same narrow population that ERAP now serves. However, a potential to grow qualification provides no tangible criteria and acts as a catch-all to allow the same mismatch of subsidy that currently occurs. If DHS simply wants to provide a few months of rental assistance, that's fine. However, DHS should be forthright in acknowledging that while DC Flex will be helpful in extending subsidies briefly, it will be quickly exhausted by the majority of its current clients and participants, and return to shelter and homelessness will swiftly follow. Another area of concern is the ambiguity regarding what happens to participants when they have exhausted all the current year's subsidy for the year's end. It's unclear whether participants are exited from the program when they have used all the year subsidy or if they're simply left a dormant participant under the next calendar year. It's unclear what participation would even look like once the subsidy has been exhausted. Realistically, participants would have to leave their units or face eviction once the annual subsidy has been used. They would return to homelessness and shelter services, forfeiting additional yearly payments without access to a rental unit. The most alarming provision of this bill cedes control of everything from the subsidy amount to program duration linked to the mayor. Mayor Bowser's administration has shown DC residents and DC Council multiple times that it's willing, with little notice, completely upend the rules, rights, and benefits of programs under its purview, rules upon which vulnerable DC residents detrimentally rely. If DC Council plans to move forward with permanent legislation on the current pilot program, it must actually legislate to establish some of the most basic and critical program framework. At a time when more people than ever need permanent vouchers, DHS and Bowser administration continue to focus more on palliative fixes like DC Flex and HPP that do not actually end homelessness for most. These programs can be effective in the right situations, but are simply not enough to address the homeless and housing insecurity issues of which DC residents seek DHS services. DC Council must evaluate existing program data and outcomes, ensuring that any permanent program extension builds upon current successes, not simply rubber stamps of failing venture and/or waste critical DC funds. DC Council must utilize data to evaluate and only affirm DHS programs that are responsive to DC resident needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drumming. I'm going to start with Ms. Dooley. On the protection of benefits, one of the things that we're trying to fully understand is how these decisions are reviewed. If somebody says, I lost, my benefits were stolen, and they go to DHS, and DHS, they may say yes, they may say no, and move to reimbursing. And can you describe from a client perspective what happens when DHS denies someone's request for reimbursement for allegedly stolen benefits?
So when DHS denies the request, claimants can file an appeal with the Office of Administrative Hearings. And at that point, they can engage in that process to have OAH reconsider the decision made by DHS.
And do they receive a written notice from DHS that the claim has been denied?
They should, yes.
And do you represent people who go before in those administrative hearings?
We can.
And what's the track record in front of those administrative hearings?
By track record, you mean whether those claims are
eventually granted despite the initial DHS denial?
I would say it really depends on the case. I don't have a kind of list of the prior decisions in my head, but it would depend on what investigation DHS has done so far and the information and evidence for each person.
I mean, some of the things that you described, there can be all different kinds of dynamics going on. So I could imagine that there could be denials in settings where denials were appropriate. So, somebody else used the card and the person wasn't aware of it. Somebody else in the family used the card in one of the scenarios that you talked about. But are you seeing a track record of inappropriate denials, or is it rare that a DHS denial is overturned, which would suggest that the DHS evaluation process is pretty good?
I would say we don't see a lot of cases for people in this exact situation where they're being denied reimbursement for benefits stolen by a third party, where everyone agrees that is what has happened. We see more cases where the person themselves is, where DHS has claimed they have engaged in a fraudulent use of their card.
Okay. All right. Mr. Drumming, you went to a lot of the issues that I was talking with Ms. Osborne about earlier, and there is a question of for who is this for? And I think that it is intended for those people for whom it can make a key difference. And it may well be that a different tool is needed for the lowest income people, but would it be to the extent, and Ms. Osborne talked about, she used an example of somebody with an income of $1,000 a month, and then the subsidy would be woefully inadequate as crafted because they'd have to spend all of their income on rent. If this were for that population, wouldn't it have to be a remake of rapid rehousing, only in this context, rapid rehousing for 5 years? And see, that seems like a heavy lift for us to do. So how are you thinking about who shallow rent subsidies, not full rent subsidies, because this is the area that we're talking about, is a program that provides shallow rent subsidies. Who do you think it should be for?
Obviously, there is a lot of need across different income brackets. I think that, kind of like what you said, I think that it should be used for those that can make use of it and would benefit from it. Unfortunately, due to just rhetoric that we've heard for the last year or so from DHS, as well as just some of the language in the bill, it's really hard to really nail down who this actually is for. We understand that one of the big advertising points of this has been that people in the FRSP, for example, can be relocated or transferred to this program. DHS has been saying that for the last year or so. But at the end of the day, when looking at the language of the bill and the actual numerical amounts, the subsidies provided, we're seeing an incongruence between what's been advertised or billed as and what it could feasibly actually be for, or who it could actually be for.
I mean, I hear you on that, but I think DHS has actually also consistently been saying this is a tool that we can use to help some of our people who are coming out of FRSP. Not all, but some. And we want to have it available as a tool for those people who it can make a difference. In your testimony, you get to, one of the things is potential to grow income, which I think is the kind of thing that they may be thinking about, where their income is at and what's their potential to grow the income over the period. And I hear you that could feel very subjective. On the other hand, there are people who you can look at their situation and say, and working with them conclude, with this kind of extra support, they can get over the line. And we want those people to get over the line. How would you target something to those folks? How would you craft the criteria? How would you think about trying to help those folks? And I understand that much of your mission is about the folks who are at even lower incomes, who have even higher needs. So I'm asking you to set that to the side for a moment and think about, okay, if there's this other population where something like this could take them over the line, how would you craft that?
Yeah, I think realistically, there is a population of people that can benefit from this subsidy. Unfortunately, I think it's really difficult considering that DHS is really looking at the FRSP population. And yes, they did say some, but they are looking at the FRSP population. And if we look at that population, that demographic, you see that the vast majority are pretty much in the same boat. The overwhelming majority of folks in FRSP and rapid housing in general have TANF as their sole means of income. We know that we've been saying for years that 97 to 99% of all folks in rapid rehousing can't afford market rent at the end of their subsidy. So I think that, yes, there may be some very small sliver of a sliver of a sliver of people that could meaningfully use this subsidy to reverse um, some of their economic troubles. In general, we're talking about a demographic that are pretty much all in the same boat. If it doesn't work for one, it probably isn't going to work for the next.
Okay, well, I mean, I hear you. I think, and if I were sitting in your shoes and I saw a proposal like this that might help some portion, you'd call it a sliver. I hope it's more than a sliver, but some portion of the folks in need. And I felt like that was going to lead to not trying to address the issues for the folks with greater needs. It would make me nervous. And it isn't, we have to walk and chew gum. We have to help the people who need it the most, but we also need to calibrate our assistance for those where less can push them over the line. That's how we can most responsibly marshal our resources and help the most people. And so this is, when I think about this, I don't think about it as rapid rehousing redux. I think of it as something different and one of the tools in the toolbox. And it's a challenge to get it right. There's a lot of subjectivity, and there's a risk of declaring victory about helping one group of people and then not helping another group of people. I hear you on both those things, but I'd like to be partners in figuring out how we might expand the tools in our toolbox so that we have the right tool for different residents and we're using our dollars as effectively as possible.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Sorry. So I definitely agree. I think that this should be just one tool in our, proverbial toolbox. I think that we definitely need an expansion of support for a variety of different subsidies. But also, I just can't stress enough that we are, everyone here is at least in part speculating, right? We really do need to see the data and see how effective and successful this pilot has been. Also, I think that one of the primary ways in which we can make this tool as useful as possible is just increasing the subsidy amount. The higher the amount of subsidy, the greater number of people can be helped, whether we are talking about that FRSP participant that's being exited, or if we're talking about that fired federal worker that needs, additional support. Just a higher subsidy amount will help. Just also, if we're looking at, because once again, we don't know what population this is really for. But if we are looking at a non-FRSP client or someone like that, this is realistically probably someone that, has or had a higher income. And because of something that happened, for example, the federal evisceration, they just can't make rent as they once were able to. So that for that population, we're talking about months of required support. On average in DC, it takes 6 months to get a new job, and those numbers have increased due to everything that's happening with the federal government. So regardless of, what population we're dealing with, we need more money, we need more time, we need to be open to other possibilities like extending the pilot because we do have time to do that. And, I know that my org, and I'm sure plenty of other orgs, are more than happy to work with your office in the next few months so that we can really nail down who's this program for, how can it be help, how can it help people? How much has it helped people? How successful has it been? So that we can really, in an informed way, move forward to make this program as good as it can be and help as many people as possible. I am realistic enough to know that this program will never help everyone. So that goes to your point that this is just a tool in the toolbox. But I think that we can definitely make this program more effective, and we're definitely happy to work with you on that.
I appreciate that, and thank you very much for your testimony and for this back and forth. I'm about to call up our government witness, and I'm hearing folks in the advocacy world saying, wait, get more information. This maybe needs to have more resources than you're talking about. I think our government witness is going to come back and say we live in a world of finite resources, and I'm not sure that we can go do more, and then raise the amounts of the subsidies. And the challenge for us is, how do we have as positive of an impact in this coming budget cycle? And so if we didn't wait, it would be because we wanted to get something going that could have a positive impact in this budget cycle. It isn't that more information couldn't help. It's that on the one hand, some folks are saying even what you're proposing isn't enough to be meaningful, but it's more than what exists now. And so how do we deal with that in the upcoming budget? But I'll leave that for back and forth with the director. And at this point, thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you, Ms. Dooley, for your testimony. And I will turn to calling up our government witness.
Thank you.
Director Pierre. And I apologize, and Ms. Mortensen. We are now joined by Rachel Pierre, the Acting Director of the Department of Human Services, and Tanya Mortensen, DHS's Chief Operating Officer. It is the practice of this committee to place our government witnesses under oath. If you would both please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you are about to provide to the Committee on Human Services is the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, you may begin your testimony, and I don't know what order or if both of you will testify.
I think I'm the only one giving testimony.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Fruman, esteemed members and staff of the Committee on Human Services, and members of our community. I am Rachel Pierre, Acting Director of the DC Department of Human Services. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on Bill 26-0366, the Flexible Rent Subsidy Program Amendment of 2025, and Bill 26-0367, the Public Benefits Security Amendment Act of 2025. I am also joined by DHS's Chief Operating Officer, Tanya Mortensen. DHS remains committed to advancing housing stability and protecting the basic needs of district residents. Since the launch of the DC Flex pilot program, 438 households have received flexible rental support, helping them cover full or partial rent when faced with emergencies, unexpected expenses, or when the money they have on hand is simply not enough. Since fiscal year 2018, DC Flex has reshaped how rental assistance is delivered, offering families greater autonomy and stability. To date, the program has provided over $50 million in rental support. The program continues to grow with Council's additional funding to the program through the fiscal year 26 budget. In March 2022, DHS responded swiftly to a surge in reports of compromised or stolen food or cash benefits. We were among the few jurisdictions nationwide to offer reimbursement using local funds. To safeguard benefits, we launched a public awareness campaign through printed materials in our website, urging Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and TANF program participants to freeze or block their electronic benefits transactions or reset their personal identification numbers regularly. More recently, we also began exploring enhanced security measures, including transitioning to the use of EMV technology and utilizing a microchip for EBT card payment transactions. These programs, DC Flex, SNAP, and TANF, are critical tools for preventing homelessness in the district and ensuring that families can meet their basic needs. We support the intent of the proposed amendment to the Homeless Services Reform Act under the Flexible Rent Subsidy Program Amendment of 2025 and the proposed Benefit Security Amendments Act of 2025. However, each bill presents challenges in its current form, and our concerns are as follows. First, regarding the Flexible Rent Subsidy Program Amendment of 2025, DHS is not currently funded to implement the bill as proposed. This legislation mandates that by October 1st, 2027, the minimum annual subsidy for families increase to $11,300 and $9,000 for individuals. It also requires an increase prior to 2027 to $9,600 for families and $8,280 for individuals. These adjustments would make DC Flex a resource-intensive program, and without dedicated funding, DHS cannot move forward with implementation. We recognize and support the intent behind these changes. With rising rent costs nationwide, it is critical that DC Flex participants have access to the resources they need to fully meet their household obligations and avoid homelessness. However, without sufficient funding, DHS would need to limit the number of new participants in fiscal year 26 and prioritize preventing new instances of homelessness to ensure that current households in the program continue receiving support for the full 5-year term as originally intended. We are committed to working with the Committee on Human Services and the full council to establish sustainable funding levels to preserve the DC Flex program's availability and integrity. We respectfully urge the committee to reconsider legislating fixed subsidy amount. Allowing DHS flexibility in setting subsidy levels would enable us to maximize enrollment and serve more households efficiently. Next, turning to the Public Benefits Security Amendment Act of 2025, DHS opposes this proposed legislation due to the significant concerns it presents. The legislation mandates that by October 1st, 2027, DHS transitions to EBT cards equipped with theft prevention microchip technology. As an initial matter, DHS would not be able to proceed with implementation absent of dedicated funding. The district was among the first jurisdictions to begin replacing stolen benefits, launching our response in March 2022. Most other states did not take action until federal law authorized reimbursement for stolen SNAP benefits. Once that federal reimbursement ended, only 3 other states in the district are known to have continued replacing stolen benefits. Replacing stolen benefits was intended to be a short-term solution while DHS worked to address the vulnerabilities that were enabling benefit theft. Since then, DHS has implemented additional security features for EBT cards, including the ability for customers to freeze their cards to prevent any transactions and to separately block all online and out-of-state transactions. DHS has also adopted a range of mitigation features informed by data analysts and best practices, including targeted PIN removals and blocking reuse of the most recent prior PIN. These changes have helped to reduce stolen benefits by giving customers the ability to protect their benefits and minimize other vulnerabilities. However, as long as magnetic strip cards are used, they will continue to be vulnerable to skimming and cloning, and even the best mitigation strategies can only contain rather than correct this core vulnerability. DHS received a formal quote on the cost to transition to chip cards from the district's EBT vendor and estimated cost for the transition based on items for each component and historical data to calculate variable cost. The total was about $3.6 million for implementation, including about $3 million for the technology upgrades and other requirements, and about $600,000 for mass card replacements. After implementation, the ongoing costs and are estimated to be $437,000 annually. DHS estimates that transitioning to chip cards would independently reduce stolen benefits claims by at least 75%, and if coupled with participation in FNS's pilot to default block high-risk transaction and other mitigation features, stolen benefits would substantially be reduced. While we appreciate the goals of this legislation, we respectfully raise some concerns with the current proposal. Most importantly, DHS does not have funding for either transitioning to chip cards or continue to replace stolen benefits. It is important that customers be active participants in protecting their benefits. If replacement benefits are available with no limits, customers have less incentive to freeze their card or take other steps to protect their benefits. This is not about transferring responsibility to customers, but rather recognizing that shared responsibility encourages greater vigilance and protecting resources. The current proposal also has a number of provisions that go beyond the district's current policy, which is already one of the most progressive policies compared with the 3 other states that still fund replacement benefits. First, DHS's current policy replaces benefits that are stolen due to scheming, cloning, and similar fraudulent methods because that is where most stolen benefits cases originate and customers have no control over those vulnerabilities. The proposed legislation expands that to any claims of stolen benefits, but a stolen card cannot access funds without the PIN. This creates significant challenges in validating claims because absent of a police report requirements or comparable verification tool, customers' attestation becomes the only evidence available to confirm unauthorized transactions. Second, the 2-year deadline for reporting stolen benefit is much longer than the deadline in the credit debit sector and among the 3 other states that are known to have continued replacement stolen benefits, which all range from 30 to 90 days. There are legitimate reasons for shorter time frames, including that evidence may not be available after extended periods and more time allows for genuine confusion between legitimate purchases and unauthorized charges, resulting in dispute based on faulty recollection rather than actual fraud. Additionally, it disincentivizes customers from regularly monitoring their accounts to catch fraudulent charges before more are completed. Third, the 10-day deadline for issuing repayments may not give sufficient time for review of claims and internal processes that are needed for issuing payments. Weekends and holidays can limit 10 days to as few as 4 business days. Fourth, while DHS does not currently require a police report for stolen benefit claims, prohibiting this removes a potential verification step that could help ensure claims are legitimate and deprives law enforcement of information on the volume and nature of the crimes. DHS required a police report between March 2022 and September 2023 and only changed their policy based on FNS's requirements to qualify for federal reimbursement of stolen SNAP benefits. After the requirement was removed, there was a spike in stolen benefit claims and a large increase in number and percentage of denied claims. Fifth, repaying alleged stolen benefits while an appeal is pending creates a new administrative process and may inadvertently encourage claims by customers as a way to access emergency funds. Most importantly, DHS has not been able to confirm with our federal partners whether we would even be permitted to reduce a customer's federally funded benefit allotment to recover an overpayment from a separate locally funded program. The proposed legislation is also unclear on some aspect of implementation that are included in other types of repayment claims. For example, whether the allotment reduction amount could be applied only once or for each claim separately if the customer has more than one, or if DHS would have any way to recover these overpayments if the household stopped receiving benefits in the district. In closing, DHS remains deeply committed to advancing programs that promote housing stability and protects the vital benefits our residents rely on to support their household. We appreciate the committee's continued partnership and thoughtful consideration of these challenges shared with you today. While we support the intent behind both bills, we respectfully urge the committee to consider the concerns I have outlined here. Thank you for the opportunity to share my testimony. I am available to answer any questions from the committee.
Great. Thank you very much for your testimony, Director Pierre. One of the things that came up in the testimony earlier is the evaluation of the DC Flex project that you guys are undertaking with the DC lab. Where do we stand on that? When do you think that we on the council will be able to see it? Is it possible that we would be able to see, even before a formal rollout, that some portion of the evaluation could be shared with the committee?
Councilmember, my understanding is that we will get a preview of the final report in early 2026, and hopefully by spring 2026, we'll be able to share the full report with the council.
Right. So you see how that compounds the conundrum that I talked about before, is that the budget process, we're going to be in the budget process, well into the budget process if it's the spring. Okay. Part of the back and forth that you heard with some of the other witnesses goes to who's DC Flex supposed to be for? And I wonder if you can speak to how you're thinking about, regardless if our legislation went through or if it stayed essentially the same as what it is at the same levels, how are you thinking about the target for the DC Flex benefits?
Councilmember, so I appreciate your sharing that, your understanding that it is to target some families. This is not a tool, as you mentioned, that's going to be successful, that all families are going to be successful with this tool, this intervention. Currently, the way we're planning on implementing the DC Flex slots, the additional DC Flex slots that we have for fiscal year 26 is for a rapid exit from shelter or for families who are exiting rapid rehousing. So while when the DC Flex was first implemented, we only targeted families who were already earning income at intake. Now we are targeting families who are likely to grow their income from shelter. They have to have a lease in their name, and also at recertification, they have to show that they are receiving earned income. So we're targeting families who have the means to afford their rent, but who are severely rent burdened, so that a big portion of their rent is going, a big portion of their income is going towards their rent, so that in these cases, if they're experiencing any other type of emergency, more than likely something will suffer, and very often it's the rent. So these are families who are, although they may be rent burdened, they can afford their rent on their own, but they do require some months, some additional support to make ends meet because they're so severely rent burdened. So it's not a rapid rehousing, as you mentioned. It's not supposed to be a full subsidy. It's not intended to support a full rent each month. It is intended to be a supplement to rent when a family may be experiencing some unexpected expenses during the month that prevents them from being able to make ends meet that month.
So when you reference that they need to show that they have earned income, so a job, at recertification, do they have to show that they have a job when they enter the program in the first place?
Not anymore. Updated regs allowed for families who were, in the process of looking for employment, but then because we want to make sure that we target the resources for folks who are likely to be able to maintain their own housing, if they just get additional support, it is important that in order to maintain your own housing, you are employed, because otherwise this is not an intervention that works, because this is not a full rental subsidy.
So what happens, so if a person doesn't have a job when they enter the program, but a year later, it's sort of recertification, and they still don't have a job, what happens?
They may be exited out of the program.
And then what is that? They stop getting the subsidy, but they now have a lease and now they are likely to be subject to an eviction process, or what then happens?
Yeah, it's possible. Then they may, go find another housing intervention that they are able to maintain on their own if they're not able to maintain their current housing situation. So this is it's not a voucher program, right? So we cannot sustain a whole rent. It is intended for people who are working, but who are continues to be rent burdened, so that to help ultimately close the gap when they're experiencing an unexpected expense or emergency.
And the way it works now, I think I saw in the responses to questions, there's some objective qualifications, and then is it a random lottery that decides who gets the benefit? Or how is it that you do the thing of figuring out this is likely to succeed for this person, but may not be likely to succeed for that person?
So at this point, families can apply for DC Flex. So it's presented in two spaces: when families are in shelter to help exit shelter, or families who are exiting FRSP. So currently, it's families have to be at 40% or below AMI, and they understand the rules of the program, and then they decide to enroll in a program because they also feel that this is something that they could benefit for.
But there's lots of people at 40% below 40% AMI who have the documentation requirements who are then not referred to DC Flex. And how do you decide which ones are referred and which ones aren't?
So at the end of FRSP, families can be assessed to see what additional resources they're eligible for. And then if a family is eligible for DC Flex, and then they would like to enroll in DC Flex, we are enrolling families exiting FRSP into DC Flex. So if they are working or planning to work and they meet the qualifications and we have enough slots, then that is the plan.
And is that the SPDAT?
Oh, the SPDAT.
The SPDAT is
Yeah,
that is that the assessment tool that you use at that point?
Yes, it's one of the tools, yes.
And key to that analysis is if they have a job or if they're looking for a job. And I mean,
But they also
anybody-
have to have a lease in their name.
they have to have a lease in their name already. And how do you get a lease if you don't have a job?
I mean, yes, it may be difficult, but it does happen.
And then what's exciting about this is the efficient use of dollars to get people over the hump. Yeah, go ahead.
If I could add, council member, so while we don't have the formal report from the lab and the evaluations, but we have a preliminary data that suggests that it is working for the majority of families. So we've exited 125 families. We started in cohort 1 who've passed their 5 years, and we haven't seen any of these families return to shelter. So the only families who've been enrolled in DC Flex that we have seen return shelter are families who were exited before 5 years. They did not recertify because either they were not working, there was some program rules violation and so forth. So preliminary, we are seeing that it is an effective tool, and it's also a cost beneficial tool to keep families from shelter. So we expanded it to individuals. This year, we're going to also pilot it to youth to help with like shared housing and so forth, because we have found that it is an effective tool for people who are working, but who are rent burdened and understand that any given month, something may happen, a medical expense, a car repair, so any other expense that they may not have predicted keeps them from being able to afford rent that month. So this is who we're targeting, folks who who are motivated and able to grow their income, who are able to afford their rent, but who are rent burdened, so that an emergency does not mean, that does not make the difference between paying my, my car expense or my rent that month.
Okay, so I hear you, for below 40% AMI, objective, have a lease, objective, have a job, objective. If somebody says, I am looking for a job, is that enough, or is there a discretionary decision about whether that person is actually going to do that?
So it's through case management. I mean, it's oftentimes it has to be like objectively, right? So then if a family understands the rules of a program and they're making a choice to enroll in a program, understanding the program rules, and they are eligible at intake, it is up to the family to participate and also to meet the requirements of the program. Like, for example, a family can't just it's families have to, when they draw down the funding, it is intended to support the rent. They can't draw down more than their lease amount at every month. And again, this is one of the tools, Councilmember. It's not a voucher, but it is really intended to help families who are working, looking for work, and who are rent burdened, and for whom a shallow subsidy can make the difference between coming into shelter or not. Right? It's not supposed to necessarily solve an affordable housing concern, but it is to support some families who are severely rent burdened, but who are able to afford their rent.
Yeah, and I don't know if you heard of the back and forth with Ms. Osborne and Mr. Drumming about what the level of the subsidy should be, and in a certain sense, how many people can be helped by $700 a month? How many more can be helped by $800 a month? How many more can be helped by $1,000 a month? And I don't know, I think what you're saying is at the $700 a month today, that the folks who stay in it from start to finish have not presented to shelter since.
That is correct.
How long a period is that?
5 years, after 5 years.
No, but I mean, who's been in, so it starts in 2019. So the people who are in it for 5 years finished in 2024.
I believe it started before. I think it was 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
So, and then the ones who exited in 2023 or 2024, the data in FY24 was none
Yeah,
presented at shelter.
that's correct.
But over a 1 year or 2 year period at that point. So it still could be fragile.
Right.
The lease requirement, it's interesting to me. Like, one of the things I thought that the tour that you gave me of 801 East was great. And there is a reference in responses to pre-hearing questions about sort of an interplay with the work bed program. And it does seem like, and I do think we need to be thinking about all the tools in the toolbox and thinking about how they relate to each other. I could see a path where somebody's been in the work bed program for a period, has a job, is supported there, that they might be a natural for this, which has the benefit of freeing up another work bed for somebody else. But I could imagine that person having a challenge getting a lease. To what extent does a person who has a job, can they go to a landlord and say, I want to get a lease, I have this income, if I get the lease, I will be able to get this supplement and you'll be okay? Or do they have to have gotten the lease first? Because I could imagine in the work bed program, it could, getting over the hump of getting the lease would be tricky, and yet they would also be a natural candidate.
So Case managers also help um, residents who are eligible for this program sort of find a unit, right? So then we do have landlords who work with us, who understand the programs, who are also very often willing to give, people a chance. A lease does not necessarily also have to be your own unit, right? You can still have in a shared housing situation and have a lease under your name, right? So what's most important to us is that we want to help household, because it's not just families, because we can help singles also with this intervention, really find a housing exit that's sustainable for them. So we help them in that sense. If they're not working yet, there are other ways for us to help them, maybe secure a unit. But that is who we're targeting.
Is it available to someone in the, if they have a lease that they have a sublease with Aunt Marion and they're going to have 2 rooms in her house, and the rent might be relatively modest, but there's a commitment that's made? Does that qualify?
It's a lease, yes.
And does the amount, so if it were a sublease in a relative's home, and that sublease could be for $700 a month, and then the DC Flex payment today would pay for the whole year?
So, I guess in theory, yes. I don't know like the details of like $700 a month, but I guess in theory it could.
I'm not trying to discourage that.
Yeah.
To the extent that there are ways to help families that want to help each other,
Mm-hmm.
I would not want to close the door to that. I'm just trying to understand how this works as it's implemented.
Right. We've been really like helping families with like co-living and so forth. I can follow up, but my understanding is that a sublease, as long as it's somebody's name and it shows the amount of the lease, a family would be eligible for DC Flex for that purpose. We actually want to encourage, again, housing interventions that people can sustain. So, yes.
All right, so, and this again, back and forth with some of the public witnesses, and you may have already said this, but are you thinking about this as primarily an exit option for households leaving shelter, a step down from rapid rehousing, or available more broadly to the continuum? And to the extent that it's a little of all of those things, what's the emphasis? Like I think we put 560 new.
Slots, yeah, that sounds, I'm thinking 336, or maybe that's rapid rehousing. I think it's. Yes.
But just in terms of,
480.
just in terms of the mix of how you're thinking about it, how are you thinking about that?
Both. So we're thinking about it from exits from shelter as well as step down from rapid rehousing. Right now, we have, for the purposes of planning, we have a half and half, half of it, but we are flexible in the way we administer it. But that's the way we're thinking about it right now. That we have half of the slots for families exiting FRSP and half of the slots for families as an exit path from shelter. Because as you remember, Councilmember, this is the first year that we're going to try something different in terms of an exit path from shelter. Last year and in the last couple of fiscal year, the primary tool for exiting shelter was rapid rehousing. I don't have to repeat the concerns we've had with rapid rehousing, so this is something we're doing differently. In past years, we have not exited families with DC Flex from shelter.
So, if somebody's in rapid rehousing, by definition, do they have a lease?
Yes, in their name.
So that they get over that hump,
Absolutely.
and then their income could be below
40%.
40% AMI, and then it's either they have a job or they say they're looking for a job.
Yep. And then at recertification, they have to have a job.
At recertification, they have to have a job. Okay. Some of the testimony went to how we help our lowest income people. And this gets into, we push the numbers up so that the subsidy can be higher. You're pushing back on that and saying it becomes unsustainable. To what extent is a focus folks who have incomes below 30% AMI? Or should it be a focus for folks with incomes below 30% AMI if there is a real risk that it would only last for a year for them? How do you think about this as a solution for our lowest income residents?
I mean, somebody who's with 30% AMI is eligible because it's below 40%, right? So 30% AMI, somebody would be eligible too. But in those cases, maybe it is around having a sublease in somebody's house because this is what they're able to kind of maintain on their own while they grow their income, and it's a sustainable plan for them because that is allowed, like I mentioned, right? So more than anything, we don't want to encourage, and obviously the cost of housing is a concern, but we want to encourage people to find housing interventions that they're eligible for. So we do want to also help people find units in the affordable, housing buildings and we encourage kind of co-living. So this could be a tool for somebody who is 30% AMI, who's able to find a sustainable housing intervention while they grow their income.
Yeah, so in here, I mean, this is really genuinely a conversation because I think we're all grappling with this. To the extent that a question is, do they have what looks like a sustainable path? It's by definition discretionary.
Absolutely.
And so the entry of discretion into the process gives qualms to everyone, but it may be necessary. And I'm trying to figure out where that discretion kicks in. Like if you have is there a place where somebody says that I don't see it? I don't see how this is going to work for this person. They qualify technically on the objective criteria, but I don't think that it's going to work for this person. We should be looking for a different solution for this person. Does that happen, and how does that happen?
So, Councilmember, we are partners with the families, right? We don't make the decisions for them. We explain to them, we help them understand what their options are, and we are a partner, a thought partner. That's what case management is, and helping a family make a choice, right? So a choice in where they want to live, and choice of, the housing intervention, and a choice in making sure that they are on a sustainable path as well. Families do not want to return into shelter once they get out of shelter. So we are not decision makers. We are there. Obviously, we're decision makers in terms of the eligibility criteria for a program and so forth. We establish regulations, we establish a policy and so forth. But then after that, the work that happens with the families is that we are partners with families in helping them make a path for themselves. So when a family comes into shelter, they co-create a housing exit plan with their case managers. So I want to make sure that we talk about it with the understanding the family is who's making the ultimate choice for themselves. We are not necessarily making the determination on which path works for them. We help them see what programs they may be eligible for. We help them understand the risk of one program versus the other, especially if they qualify for multiple programs, because a family can, at shelter exit, qualify for both FRSP or DC Flex. And at that point, it is a choice that the family is making. And they may decide, hey, I prefer the shallow subsidy for a longer time versus almost like a full subsidy for 12 months, right? So we are partners with families, and families have choice, and we want to help the family make a choice that they feel is in their best interest long-term.
Okay, super helpful. And I can picture that conversation, particularly if FRSP is actually 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
Because if FRSP looks indefinite, then why wouldn't you go with FRSP?
Exactly.
But if FRSP is 12 months and this is 12 months unless you found a job within 12 months, because in order to be recertified, you're going to need to have a job, but then it can be 5 years. Then you could have a family who said, you know what, that's the path I want to take. All right, super helpful to understand that dynamic. We've had a back and forth. You heard me back and forth with the public witnesses. We'll have a little bit of a back and forth about what's the subsidy level. You don't want an unfunded mandate. I understand why it gives you qualms. We see data that says, on average, folks run out on month 8. And so then we think, and some of our public witnesses have said, well, it doesn't look like it's enough. And so the question to you is, why shouldn't I interpret the fact that on average the benefits run out by month 8 as an indication that the benefits are not as high as they need to be?
I think I shared in my testimonies that we agree and support the intent of the legislation to review funding levels, to look at the data, to see how we can really use data to make sure that it's an intervention that really keeps families from returning into shelter. Mandating, like legislating an amount is would significantly disrupt our process for this year, I have to say, because we have families who've started with, and we have budgeted for $8,400 for the next 5 years, and they may be at year 2. So changing that amount now, mid 5 years, we would have to just recalibrate how many families we can exit this year, for example. But we are open to working with council to really look at data, evaluate where we have the budget to potentially increase the funding level. So we're not against making that assessment, but we wanna be able to be in partnership and looking at the pros and cons of increasing the funding level, and not necessarily mandating a cap, I guess, a funding level at this time.
And we also heard testimony that one family might need X and another family might need something different. Today, you don't have discretion in setting the amount. Everybody gets the same amount. Do you think, would you like to have the discretion in setting the amount? And if you did, how would you go about it?
No, I mean, I think if you're asking if we want to, like, this family gets 8,400, this family gets 9,000, if you're asking in that way, I don't think we would, I'm speaking for myself, I don't think we would support this. But if we decide, starting next year, we have the budget, even if your family is in year 3, everybody gets a bump, then we would support, that for that amount.
Okay, but you don't want to differentiate between
Because
one beneficiary and another.
It
You don't want
becomes too
to.
subjective, it becomes too many factors, this is, yeah.
Okay, and to my question about the 8 months and why that shouldn't make me concerned that the amount is not sufficient, I think you didn't really. The way I heard you is, yes, we need to look at the level, not that. No, that isn't an indication that the levels might be too low, but just that you want to step back and look at that level based on other data.
Right, and then we can be in partnership on how we set levels, yes.
And when you hear my concern about, we have a budget cycle coming up, and if the study comes out in the spring, how are we going to deal with that? And so let's be talking about that.
Yeah, and we can always adjust and look at regulations versus putting it in the legislation, because it does allow us for more flexibility year after year.
Okay, a different thing that goes to whether or not the levels are high enough, and this is a lead up to one of the questions I warned you I'd be asking about, is to what extent do we have folks who are benefiting from DC Flex who also get ERAP?
So for whatever reason, I'm drawing a blank on whether or not families are eligible for ERAP if they're receiving DC Flex as well. But I can get that data for you at a later. It can be a follow-up.
Okay, because I mean, that's another thing that goes to the sufficiency of the benefits.
Yeah, I mean, so they are eligible for ERAP. I don't have the data on like how many families who are receiving DC Flex are also receiving it, but we can get that data.
Okay, so now that you brought up ERAP.
I don't know if I brought it up, but
So where, if you can say where we are on this, I mean, you can imagine.
Yes.
You must get a lot of questions about this. I get a lot of questions about this. People are trying to understand what is the landscape, and I want to give you an opportunity to clarify the landscape as best you can.
yes, thank you. And we are in the 99% completed with a communication plan that we will be distributing to council and the public next week. Is that sufficient?
Well, I guess, I mean, Dan's going to tell me no, but I think that it probably needs to be, if you're saying you're 99% done with your communications plan, which means you're not done, so you don't feel authorized to say more, but you're also telling me that you will say
Yes.
significantly more
Yes,
in a week.
yes,
And you
but
can't hide from me, so
yes,
my expectation is that by the end of the week next week, we will have clarity on
Absolutely.
this subject. And if we don't, then we're going to see each other.
yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. So one of the things that we do in our legislation, and I get it that you're worried about us legislating too much, but we don't. To what extent do folks graduate out because their incomes do grow, which is the thing that we want, and so they might get to 45% AMI at a recertification? Are they exited?
No.
What criteria do you use to exit people based on increased income?
Yeah, so what's very important for me with DC Flex that it is not a tool that continues to contribute to the benefit cliff. So we are looking at updating just regulations and for DC Flex. I don't think we have a cap right now, but we're looking at potentially 80% of AMI so that it allows folks to continue and incentivize to grow their income and not be penalized for growing their income. And it continues to be something that they can count on for 5 years.
So I hear you on that. And benefits cliffs is a thing that we need to, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, actually. We talked about it, I talked about it some with you and some with former Director Zeilinger through the WIC, but it is a thing that I do want to be focusing on in this fall and winter. So I could see, though, that as your income goes up, the support goes down, but not down in a dollar for dollar kind of way. And are you thinking about that sort of thing? If somebody recertifies and they're at 50% AMI, it's not that they lose the benefit entirely, it's that they lose $100 of the benefit. Now that's their 10% of AMI is $12,000, or 10% of AMI is what for a family of 4? It is like $10,000.
I can't tell you from the top of my head, but let me explain how it could work. So DC Flex is not distributed monthly. It's not like you get to draw, $700 like every month. You have to show what is the additional expense and why it's keeping you from being able to pay your rent. So it could be that a family is increased their income so that they don't necessarily get to draw down the whole $8,400 for that year because they are able to maintain and their rent even when they're experiencing an emergency. And the funding does not roll over year after year. So it could be something that they just don't get to draw down the full amount because their income is growing and they don't, they're even if they're experiencing an unexpected expense, they continue to be able to afford their household expenses.
Oh, so the calculation of what the allowable draw is that a thing that's done at the recertification process?
It's done based on you cannot draw more than what your rent is that month, but you also need to show documentation of the emergency before you draw down that month.
And what's that documentation of the emergency?
If it's a medical bill, if it's a car a repair expense, and you need a car to go to employment, if it's a death of a loved one or
But doesn't
loss of income.
But doesn't it also have to be my income is X, and say my income is $1,000 a month and the rent is $1,700? I can't pay the rent with my income. Is that an emergency?
But then you don't qualify. This is not a good intervention for somebody with DC Flex because you can't continue to afford your rent, right? So at recertification, you have to show that you can afford your rent with your income, and that
You have to show that you can afford, or that you can afford with the supplement from DC Flex.
So DC Flex is a shallow subsidy. It's not necessarily a housing subsidy to help people make ends meet each month. So it's really, again, targeted for people who are able to afford their rent, but they are rent burdened, so that they experience another emergency that they may not be able to afford that rent this month because they are focusing on paying the emergency.
But so in order to, if somebody used $2,300 as the rent for a 2-bedroom apartment and family of 4, and so if that's 30% of their income, they'd need to be making over $7,000 a month, which would be $8,400, which would be $84,000 a year, which would be well over 40% AMI. If somebody's at 40%, below 40% AMI, and they qualify, how could they possibly afford a 2-bedroom rent on their income?
I mean, so there are other, again, like low affordable housing units that they would be cheaper than the 2,600. There could be a co-living situation. We're making assumptions that the average person in DC Flex their rent is about $2,700. It could be some, but I don't know if that's the average rent. I mean, that's probably information that we have that we can kind of get back to you, but someone who's making $1,000 a month, DC Flex may not be the right intervention for them. They're probably better off with, if they are eligible for the housing choice voucher or like a full voucher, but it may not be a good intervention for them. Just like ERAP, sometimes people are denied ERAP because they cannot show that they can continue to afford their rent, even if we pay the back pay, right?
No, I hear you on that. It's just that I guess, and this is enlightening for me, but I had thought that a role for DC Flex is somebody who is who's within reach of being able to cover their rent, but can't cover their rent, and this gets them over the hump, not just in response to an emergency, but frankly, just because of what their income is and what the rent that's available to them. You're telling me, I think, that no, you can only draw down in the face of an emergency, not just economic burden, which is different than the way that I understood it.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is.
Yes, that's the way it is. I mean, I don't know what in terms of the documentation, how stringent the review of the documentation, but that's the intent of the shallow subsidy.
That it's a kind of insurance, it's like ERAP as an insurance policy. It's there to respond
Yes.
to emergencies. And if there isn't an emergency, it won't be used.
That's a
And-
good way to look at it.
And how often does it go unused?
So the question is, how many families don't use the full subsidy?
Yeah.
That I don't know. I can get that information.
Okay, I'll be curious to see that.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think that in some cases, it probably does cover the rental gap, council member, because it's families have expenses throughout the month and they can show the expense throughout the month that keeps them from being able to afford the rent. So obviously it's used to cover the rental gap, but the idea is to really want to make sure that we help families find units that they're able to afford, even if it means that they're rent burden, with the understanding that even if you're rent burden, that you may need some support for month by month to, for the rental gap.
Okay, and recertification happens every year?
Yes.
Is that the right cadence for recertification?
Do you have thoughts on?
I mean,
different
should it
cadence?
happen more frequently? Should it happen every 2 years? Just,
I mean, I think we feel like annual is a good balance. It may take people, a while to get, their income. A lot of things can happen during a year, but I wouldn't recommend any more frequent than 12 months.
okay. In response to pre-hearing question 13, I think you said 47 families exited DC Flex in FY25 and said they were exited because they either were not current on rent or did not complete the recertification process. So am I right? Is that about 20%? 47 out of 220, so that would be about 20%. Seems like that's a pretty significant amount, 20% exit in 1 year. Do you know, because they were not current on rent, and how many were exited because they didn't pursue recertification or didn't complete recertification?
I'm sorry, Councilmember, I think I missed your question.
So 47, in your responses, you said 47 people exited
25, yeah.
in FY25,
Yeah.
and 2 reasons were offered. One was they weren't current on rent, and the other is they didn't recertify. And
You're asking for the distribution.
yeah,
of which I
between
don't
the
think
two.
I have that information, no, but we can follow up if the team has it.
And the not current on rent. So I guess these would be people who had exhausted their benefits and still weren't current on rent. And because or maybe they weren't, could it be they weren't allowed to draw down on their benefits because they didn't have a particular emergency and then they're not current on rent?
No, more than likely that there would be, because if somebody's enrolled in DC Flex, the idea is they have to have a lease and that, we keep them from coming to shelter. So it could be that they've exhausted the subsidy and they're now 3 months at recertification. They are 3 months behind on rent, for example. That could be one of the reasons. Then again, it could be that unfortunately DC Flex was not a good intervention for that particular household, but we wouldn't not allow a family to draw down rent because they're not necessarily showing an emergency. But the only thing is that they have to show that they're using the drawdown to pay the rent.
I think one thing that we can just put a pin in for now is like maybe we'll get together, or Dan will get together with somebody and walk through that process of the drawdown of rent and what is presented for drawdown in rent, and maybe even showing an example where there was a request for a drawdown that was denied and what kind of basis there was for denial of a drawdown. And recertification, one of the reasons for not recertifying is you don't have a job at the time. Is that the most common reason for not recertifying, or?
Yes, I believe so.
And in terms of not being current on rent, is there a threshold? If I'm 1 month behind on rent, would I be terminated, or do I need to be behind a number of months on rent?
I'm not sure it's defined, but that's a good question. I don't know if it's defined in our policy and how far you have to be in rent to not be certified. Because if they could be referred to ERAP if ERAP is available, but if ERAP is not available, then that may be a concern.
Okay, all right, so let's turn to the benefits theft. And I have, and I'm trying not to, I don't want to promise, but I think it's 10 to 12. I'd like to be done at 10 after 12. So I'll give you a light at the end of the tunnel. That's, I think we can do that, but again, Dan might clapper me. So one thing is pivoting to having these chips. I know it's up in the air, but there's talk about a $750,000 grant that we're pursuing. And then if we do it in FY26, the feds will cover half of it. So when we talk about $3.6 million, would the actual cost to the district, if the feds covered, there's a couple of ways the math could happen. If the feds covered half of it, they would give it could be 3.6 divided by 2, 1.8 million, then the grant. So it costs us $1 million to do it if we did it in FY26. Is that right?
I'll let Tanya answer.
It's a little bit more nuanced than that. You are right about the total cost estimate that we're looking at. But this is a lengthy process, so it's not something we can just turn on and be able to do quickly. It will happen over time. So that does impact how much of it we can do. For example, if we start now or very soon, we think we could do most of the implementation in fiscal year 26, and that would maximize the 50% reimbursement piece of it. We don't think that we could get to the point of actually being able to replace all of the cards, reissue the cards. That would happen in fiscal year 27. So if that makes sense to you. So if we get the grant, that would reduce the amount of local funding. If we were able to start this very soon, we would probably be looking at approximately 1.56 million in local costs. But again, it depends on how soon we start and how much of that 50% reimbursement we're able to capture, plus whether we get the grant.
Because thank you, helpful. The biggest picture, the exact numbers are not as, I don't want to get too tied up in it, but enormous, significant savings, and the cost benefit analysis is different the sooner we do it. So if it's, and the evidence of theft went down pretty significantly between FY24 and FY25. And that's a good news story, but it could also change the cost benefit analysis. Looks like $2 million in total losses in FY25. Do I have that right, or 2.5?
Yeah, no, the amount actually paid out was just over $2 million.
Okay, so if we had these cards and they resulted in 75% reduction, I think you guys say that in yours, we use 90%, but just say 75% reduction, and it was $2 million in FY '25, it would pay for itself in 1 year if we did it now.
We think we would actually hit that break-even point in probably 2027. And that's really because of how long it would take, plus you factor in the 75%. So it's probably looking a little bit more like 2027. Again, it would depend on how quickly we would be able to start. But just cautioning, it is a lengthy process. There's a number of steps involved, including before we could even get started, we would have to work through an advanced planning document with FNS. So we would have to get approval for this. We estimate that would take about 6 months to even do that. And then the rest of the process also has a time frame attached to it. So just cautioning that it isn't something that we can just turn on. It will take time. There are real benefits to doing it sooner rather than later if we were funded to do that.
Okay, and part of the reason, I mean, actually your 6 months, which they're closed right now, so you couldn't start, but hopefully they'll open again soon and you could start, coincides with when a supplemental budget might come forward. And so there's not money in the budget right now to do it, but I'm wondering, could there be money in the budget, in a supplemental budget that could come forward with the mayor's budget in April that could spend this money and secure the savings that would be associated with it? Is that a thing that is on the table? Is that a thing that you are raising with the executive, whether it's including the dollars in a supplemental budget or doing some sort of a reprogramming in the interim? How much would you like to do this where you can get the 50% support?
It is a very effective way from what we've seen to prevent theft, and it is probably the most sustainable way to do that. We are not currently funded, as you know. Whether there will be funding at some point is, at this point, we're not sure about that, but there are definitely some benefits if we were able to start that this year. And then how early we started again has a big impact on how much gets the 50% as opposed to 25% in fiscal year 27. So we haven't really gotten that far. We are looking at it closely. We are having conversations about it. And it would be good for our customers if we were able to do it.
Okay, so I want to be a partner in that. I am sort of asking you what you're asking the mayor and her team for, and you can't completely answer that question, but I hope that you will be asking the mayor and her team to make this incremental investment, and I will be doing that. Okay. So there was a big reduction between 24 and 25. Is that a trend, or is that securing the benefit, a benefit from a move, and unless we make another move, we should be expecting something along the similar lines?
It is very difficult to predict. We've seen things go up and down, but we have implemented a number of mitigation strategies since this started. One of the things that we have done more recently tentatively, I'll say it looks like things are going in the right direction, especially over the last couple of months. We've really expanded PIN removals. I think as you know, these cards all have to have PINs. Once those are removed, the cards can't be used at all until the PIN is then replaced. And so we saw some early success when we saw a spike in cash benefits by really expanding PIN removal to all of those cards. Then we transitioned that when we saw a similar large spike for SNAP theft of benefits as well. So now we are actually removing PINs on all of the cards, and that does look like it's really pushing down the theft, at least over the last couple of months. But I will caution this to just say, we have seen dips below and then we have seen spikes. And we have to really keep on top of looking at these trends. We have a team that does that. We look at the data. And so we really have to stay on top of emerging trends, because once we think we've got something that's working, we then see it pop up in a different way. So we are hopeful that this signals a trend in declining theft.
Yeah, so, and there's different kinds of things, the blocking and the pins and this. But I guess what I'm hearing from you is, even with the mix of different things, this remains a priority. You'd like to get to a place where we're using the chip technologies as opposed to the magnetic strip technologies.
Yes, if we had the funding to do it, we would be moving in that direction.
Okay. In terms of reimbursements for stolen benefits, in the last year, I think the money's come out of the local TANF, as I recall, to reimburse benefits. Is that right?
We've actually used surplus funding in order to cover the cost of it. And as I think you know, we did have some federal funding for SNAP for a while that covered some of the cost. That continued into the early part of last year. So there was a little bit of federal funding that we were able to use for the SNAP reimbursement last year, and then the year before, SNAP benefits were covered. So that helped keep the local costs down. But we really had to look to where we could repurpose surplus. And so last year, that was really focused on, we had some surplus from the Office of Migrant Services, and that is what we really look to in order to cover the cost.
Am I remembering correctly? I thought I saw in the pre-hearing questions that it was local TANF.
Yeah, we may have started out with using some, hitting that line, but what we're really looking at was surplus funding. And we don't actually have a surplus in our local TANF program.
Right. There's a cost pressure of, I think, 1.7 million, which is not very different from the 2 million used to cover this, which I wondered, is this the cause? But it's not, because you're using something different. Do you have funds available to cover stolen benefits now?
We don't have any dedicated funding this year, but we are, again, looking at the spend closely, working with the mayor's budget office, and we do have a commitment to continue funding the cost of stolen benefits for fiscal year 26. So we'll be working closely with the budget office on tracking that spend, making sure that we have the funding to do that.
And so you're going to have to figure out where it's going to come from. That's going to be a back and forth with the mayor's office.
Right. At this point, yes.
Okay. And then that back and forth can also include, can we get off this merry-go-round and invest in chip cards so we don't have to do this, look for a way to fund this going forward. So I hope that'll be part of the conversation. Our team has heard that reimbursements for stolen benefits can get tricky when residents have large balances on their accounts, like when they receive compensation for past underpayment and those balances are then stolen. We hear that some residents in these situations have received only partial reimbursements of their benefits. Is there a way to give full reimbursement? And I mean, that's a particularly hard hit when it's a large amount. I think that there is some reference to federal limitations on how much you can reimburse, but our read of it is you could be doing it in this context. What is your take on these claims when they include back payments that haven't sat there for a long time, but that were provided in response to a claim for back payment, and then that gets stolen?
I don't have in front of me data on how often something like that happens. When we started the program in March of 22, we didn't have any limits on this, but I believe as Director Pierre testified earlier, we didn't really have a sense of how long this would continue. When we became eligible and for federal reimbursement, there was some criteria that were part of becoming, being able to get federal reimbursement for the SNAP portion. And so at that point, we did impose some new structure on the program. And so we do have some limits at this point. How often we have a situation where somebody exceeds those amounts, I think is a pretty, the data that I'm looking at, it's not a frequent occurrence that we are denying somebody's claim because they're over the limit or because they've exceeded the structure that we have now, which is really they can get 2 reimbursements annually, and that's for the type of claim. So they can do that for both SNAP or cash claims. And there is some limit on the amount that they can be reimbursed, and that is about, I believe it's twice their monthly allotment. So we will reimburse up to that amount.
Yeah, and that goes to this issue. Okay, so and I asked you about where the money comes from in FY26, and last week at a hearing on the budget and overspending generally, City Administrator Donahue said, where there's pressing human needs, we are going to do it. And what I'm hearing from you is you don't know exactly how you're going to do it, but you're going to reimburse for stolen benefits in FY26. What happens in these things? It seems like there's got to be a pattern. There can't be 1,000. Well, maybe there's 1,000 skimmers out there, but it seems like this is a criminal enterprise and probably not that many people involved, but maybe I'm wrong on that. To what extent are there criminal referrals that come out of your investigations of these matters?
So when we substantiate a claim, and most of the claims are validated, and those will be paid out by us, we'll also make a referral to the Office of the Inspector General, and then the decision to prosecute it is really with them.
So you go to the Inspector General, and the Inspector General then makes a decision about a criminal referral.
That's right. And as you know, we used to require a police report, but we don't do that anymore.
And your fraud investigations group, like on the one hand, the description of what they do doesn't sound like a ton, although I think that you had in your pre-hearing questions, there are certain things that they do that you're not talking about because that would disclose something that might benefit the folks who are operating. So maybe that therein lie the explanation, but why the investigations? In 1 year, they averaged 23 days, and it just didn't seem like there was that much going on that would take 23 days. More typically, it's like 2 weeks, but doesn't seem like, help me understand why it takes 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, so we do have a dedicated team that works on this from our, so we have dedicated investigators from our fraud team since we started this that are working on it. It might not seem like a lot, but you're right that, we don't talk about the methods publicly in a very specific way because that could get in the way of fraud prevention generally. But we do need to validate the claim so that we're being responsible about how we're using these funds. So we're really trying to strike a balance there. We do look at a number of things in order to validate every claim. Part of that is validating the amount. That is not something that takes a long time. We review the claim that's submitted. So we do get a claim that is written about, from the customer explaining what happened. We will look at that. And there's a number of methods that we'll use to go behind that and actually validate what happened there. And that could be looking at transaction history for the household. That could be looking at patterns based on new and emerging trends that we're seeing. So it's and data from customers that help us understand where some of this is happening. And then it has to get processed for payment as well. So where you're seeing some of those 23 days, I believe that was when we had a few months where we were hit very, very hard. We had a very large number of claims. I think we had over 8,000 claims in fiscal year 24. So we have a very small team that we cobbled together that, we didn't hire new people for it. We've just assembled a very small team of people. And so we're not really able to scale when we have large volume of claims, and we try to process them as quickly as possible. So we have reduced that time quite significantly. I think our average for fiscal year 25 was 18 days. And I believe in our state plan, we had said 30 days. We, of course, want to do it sooner than that. But if we get hit with large numbers on a month, it takes a little bit more time.
Okay. And do you look at how it's done in other states? How does what we do compare to what Maryland and Virginia does? How does our timetables compare to what Maryland and Virginia do? How they do?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do talk to our partners frequently to help to understand collectively what they might be seeing in terms of emerging patterns and fraud. So we do have that kind of regular touch base. I'm not sure in terms of what they are seeing, how long it takes them to process the claims, but we can see if that's something we'd be able to get a hold of.
All right, well, let's do that. We're 12:10. I'm going to steal 5 minutes, but no more than 5 minutes. Non-skimmer theft. I mean, the skimmer theft it seems like that's the big thing, but what's non-skimmer theft look like, and how big is that? Because that may or may not be, that won't be gotten at through the chips.
Are you talking about, so you're talking about theft that would be, somebody steals a purse or something like that? Yeah.
Is that what it
Yeah.
is? I mean, there is a certain category that is non-skimmer theft, and how big is it?
Yeah, I can't speak to that. What I can say is this is the problem that emerged in 2022 and why we're reimbursing stolen benefits. It is really specific to this trend that emerged and has continued and got very, very big. Instances of, other like actually stealing a card or, I think those do happen, but those would go through a separate process. And I don't have any information to indicate that is significant or represents a significant number of claims.
Okay, and then I've asked about decisions to deny. If there's a decision, somebody makes a claim, stolen benefits, DHS grants it, they reimburse, denies it, gives a written denial, and there's the opportunity to appeal it to the Office of Administrative Hearings.
That's correct.
And then the transaction blocking pilot participation, sounds like you're doing that. Could be helpful, but you don't see it as a full answer and still want the chips.
Right. It would be complementary. I do have to qualify. We are not doing that right now. We are not funded to do that. It is something we are interested in, and we do think it could be helpful. There are some limitations with that as well, but I believe we said this in our answers as well. I mean, the majority of this does occur either through online or out-of-state transactions. And so that is something we've consistently seen. Even if we did the default blocking, customers would be able to unblock it. So how often they would do that, we don't know. That could get in the way of it being effective. Customers do have that ability now to block those transactions themselves. And I don't have data in front of me about how often they take advantage of that, but that's an option.
But I guess the concern is under that program, somebody could block, then unblock, then block, and then there's costs associated with the blocking and then the unblocking, but the chips are a more foolproof solution.
The chips, from everything we've seen, those would be those would be a much more effective long-term solution, yes.
So in terms of the hierarchy of potential programs, chips are at the top of the list of solutions in this area.
Yeah, that is what, yes, that is what we understand. We have not seen actual data from the only state that has actually moved to do this and has implemented with it, which is California. So the data that we are looking at is really from the debit and credit transition that happened in 2015. And so we're estimating 75%. We think that's probably conservative, but be helpful when we start seeing some data come out of what California is doing. We haven't seen that yet.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you very much for your testimony. I think on both of these things, on DC Flex, this is an area that I'm really interested in, want to support, and we work together in the budget process trying to support it. I do think it's how it fits in the landscape and how it's funded and is going to be important. I think a demonstration of how it works would be very helpful for us as we move forward on this benefits theft dimension. Let's get this done. I mean, this really feels like penny wise, pound foolish when you think over the longer term. So I want to be a partner in making that happen. And on those notes, this concludes today's public hearing. If you plan on submitting written testimony for the record, please do so by uploading it to the council's online hearing management system before the record closes at 5 p.m. on Thursday, November 13th. The time is now 12:15 p.m. and this hearing